Crossovers podcast, where I, Tam Lines, artist and musician, interview other artists and musicians about one sight, one sound, and one text. Today I'm talking to Jess Beechey, who runs Crossovers Collective with me, about all things Cornish. I had a lovely chat with Jess, and we covered hanging about in caves, horror soundtracks, and the burgeoning music scene of Cornwall. Hope you enjoy this interview. It was lovely to have it with Jess, and stay tuned for the next editions. Oh, and by the way, this interview was recorded in December 2023, in case there's any anachronisms. If you want to find more of Jess's work, go to Instagram and search Yiskah, that's Yiskah. Enjoy. Welcome, Jess, to the Crossovers podcast.
Thank you for having me at the Crossovers podcast.
Yeah, if any listener is a bit weirded out by the tone, it's because Jess is one of the runners of Crossovers, so it seems a bit awkward to invite her onto the Crossovers podcast, considering that she is Crossovers. She is one half of Crossovers, the heart of it.
Next time you'll have to do an interview with yourself.
I can do that. I'd probably find that easier.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always one of those things where, like, in one of the later episodes of the podcast, the hosts have to turn their questions on themselves and really come to terms with the annoying tasks which they get other people to do. So I'm waiting for that.
It's going to come.
But yeah, so the premise of the Crossovers podcast is that I interview artists and musicians about a sight, a sound, and a text that means something to them. That's obviously a very vague brief, but Jess, you've risen to the challenge pretty well, and you came back pretty quickly with some responses, and they seem very cohesive.
Good.
But yeah, I mean, sorry?
I was just going to say it was terrifying at first, thinking of the choices, but then they sort of just came throughout the day.
Yeah, I know how hard the task is because I'm always, like, walking about, like, I spend a lot of my life thinking about my desert island discs and really tormenting myself with that. So I know how impossible the task is, but in this case you only had one sound to pick out of all the sounds in the entire universe.
That one was actually one of the harder ones, I thought.
Yeah, well, as a musician, it's probably going to be the hardest.
Yeah, true.
So Jessica Beechey is a sound artist, musician, and am I missing anything?
Sound person.
Sound person. That's general sound
designer,
being.
sound engineer. I don't know, there's too many things.
Basically, if it involves sound waves, especially going through electronic devices.
Yes, my favourite kind.
Jess is your guy.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want me to, like, plug off the bat?
Not specifically at the moment, but in the new year, I will have a release, which will be linked to my site option today.
Oh, really? How far into the new year?
I'm hoping not too far into it. I'm also making a zine, of which Tam is a big part. And it will be in that as well. So, and that first issue will be in line with the spring equinox in March, around the 20th. So I'm thinking my release might be just before then.
March 2024. I mean,
March 24.
I don't know when this podcast is going to come out yet.
Yeah, that's why I don't know what to plug.
Basically, if you're listening to this in March 2024 or later, then go look at Jess's stuff. That will be the Boulder Dash zine and anything under the name Yiskah.
Yes.
That's Yiskah. I thought since it's the first crossovers podcast, maybe we should talk briefly about what crossovers is.
Yeah, good idea.
This is sort of a part of like a greater thing. Crossovers being Crossovers Collective, which is a music and art collective that myself and Jess set up, mostly based around the southeast of London. We've been doing regular events at Matchstick Pie House in Deptford. We had our 11th in October 2023.
Yes. November, I think.
Oh, word. We had our latest in November 2023.
The last of 2023.
So when you're listening to this, we'll probably be having events on as well, and we'll be plugging those at the end of every podcast.
Yes, they're always on, well, at the moment, they're always on a Monday, once a month, for sure, and hopefully we'll have others.
If you're a musician or anyone involved in the performing arts, though, you probably understand that things change. The performing art and music scene in London and the UK in general is pretty precarious. So the venue and the location may change from us when we talk and when the podcast comes out.
And it may not. It may be exactly the same, so we might be
hopefully it's the same. Hopefully everything is great and good always, and there's always music happening.
Yes. This is when music dies in 2024.
Yeah, did I cover what crossovers is enough, do you think?
Yeah, I reckon so. We could always go into a bit about the sort of ambitions with podcast being like the second kind of big thing, and maybe the fact we want to go into like a label-ish.
Well, instead of talking metally, you could have just said that.
Yeah, I could have just said it. I realised that's why I slowed down at the end. I don't do this. Well, yeah, this is like...
You're on air! You're on air, Jess.
I need a little light up here to remind me. Okay, let me rephrase it. Well, the podcast is sort of the second iteration of the crossovers idea. The first being the live shows. No, I'm not going to say second. I'll say another one. With the live shows being like the first thing, and we've been running socials. We have a big Discord with loads of people in it, and we've started to get a bit of interest from other aspects as well, other members branching out into things. So yeah, there's a few more things hopefully going on next year, potentially developing into a bit more of a label.
Next year being 2024, which is probably when you're listening to this. Yeah, I mean, we're not really a set thing. And we, although we've kind of led crossovers most of the time it's been running, it's not attached to mine or Jess's names.
No.
So, who knows? There'll be other guests in the future who are involved in crossovers podcasts, others who might not be as well. And while I'm sort of leading this podcast development, there may be someone who one day takes the mantle, or there might be other weird, cool art, music stuff happening.
Video,
in other
anything
fields.
physical, online.
Yeah. It's something as well with the podcast is that, as we sort of alluded to already, that the like live physical music and art scene is quite hard to find. It's quite hard to find a settled existence in that. And I think part of the reason that podcasts have become so big over the last few years is that people can kind of more reliably put them out than actually put on events in physical spaces, which is sort of depressing in a way. But also, it'd be nice to reach new communities and kind of have something regular that we can rely on even when venues don't respond or we run out of money.
Close down.
Or whatever, or they close down.
Yeah, it's terrifying. And because I think that's sort of, obviously it's nationwide, but particularly in London, just because of ridiculous fees and rents and everything. But on the back of that, we'd love to take it, particularly outside of southeast London, but also outside of London itself.
Well, yeah, we'll probably touch on that in your choices.
Yes.
So maybe that's a good chance to move on. So the choices are sight, sound, and text. These can be anything. So I always send a handout to all the guests and tell them that a sight could be something in an art gallery, a film, a painting, or it could be something a bit vaguer or something a bit more everyday, like a teacup or the sunset, or I don't know, something that they saw that could have been beautiful or traumatizing or whatever. I don't know. It doesn't have to be a great thing. It's just something that's important or that you want to talk about.
Yeah.
So, Jess, you came to me and told me that your site was going to be... I've actually forgotten the name of it. It's this bioluminescent moss that you found in a cave in Cornwall.
Yes.
Actually, I've got it here. Schizostega in Carn Uni Fogu.
Yeah.
Am I pronouncing any of that right?
I don't know about the scientific name of the moss because I did not learn Latin in school, but Carn Uni is correct. And I say fugu, but there's a lot of debate about how it's spelt and how it's pronounced. So.
All right.
Yeah. So yes, correct.
Correct-ish. Correct as far as we know.
Yes, exactly.
So why did you pick this bioluminescent moss?
So like you said, I found it in this fugu called Carn Uni, which I spent a lot of time visiting last year. And every time, I think maybe the first time I didn't notice it 'cause it was absolutely chucking it down with rain. And so I couldn't go inside the actual fugu, which is made up of like a tunnel and a chamber, a beehive chamber. And the moss was in the actual beehive chamber, but it was so flooded I couldn't go inside. But every time afterwards I saw this bioluminescent moss, which you kind of see from certain angles depending on the light reflecting off of it. And I was there for my final master's degree project, where I was exploring the acoustomological and acoustic qualities of the fugu to support the theory that fugus were ritual spaces. And the research concluded with a performance that I designed for Carn Uni fugu in particular.
So, that's great. I'm kind of wary of... I'm not wary. I'm kind of aware that fugu is probably a word that most people have not heard. So, could you describe a little bit more what that is? Yeah,
I hadn't even heard of it before starting this project, because the project originally was just like the study of caves, basically. And it was my dad that pointed me to fugus. And they're a man-made Iron Age cave specific to Cornwall, so only found in Cornwall, where there's supposedly 14 of them, but there's lots of speculation into what's really a fugu, what classifies as a fugu, and obviously there's going to be probably going to be tons that aren't discovered yet. But they're mostly unexplored by archaeologists and historians and everything. But in particular, there's like little to no research in the sound related to fugus, like acoustics and sort of history of the fugus and the sound-based history of the fugus. So that's why I started looking into it.
Yeah, I think there's something that's interesting about that is like that sound is so immaterial, right? So like it's kind of easy for people to ignore sound when they're looking archaeologically, because unless there's like literally an instrument there where they can go, oh yeah, there's this lute.
Yes.
So people play music here. Like it's hard for it not to be pure speculation that there's some sound involved. Although like when you think of a ritual in any like cliche ritual in any film, sound is always like a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And chanting and singing. And I'm not trying to like say, yes, in Cornwall they're definitely doing like the cliche folk horror chants.
Oh, there was lots of sacrifice.
Yeah. But I mean, where's Cheddar Man? I mean, that's not Cornwall, but
nice. I think Goss? No, that's the other cheese. Devon, Dorset, somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, those southwest.
Yeah, southwest. Yeah, but it's true. It's sort of like you said, the kind of sort of generic ritual sound as well as always chanting or instrument based. And then my whole point was exploring like the acoustics and the soundscape ecology of the fugus, because they're Iron Age as well. So fugu is Cornish for cave, but they're not like your traditional. You're like your standard cave. Your regular they're cave. Man-made. Yeah, exactly.
So how, do you know how they made it, or?
So it was made out of stone, but there's also a lot of there's no history dating back to when they were built. Hence there being no proof or like speculation into why they were built.
I guess I meant are they like carved into the earth, or are they built?
Yeah. Well, so now they are like underground, but they're underground in Iron Age villages.
Right.
And I think it is like common kind of acceptance that they were built underground. But a lot of these Iron Age villages were discovered, and then the fugus discovered later.
Right.
Yeah, but then because like the speculation as well is that they were either used for refuge, ritual, or storage. But then there's loads of points that kind of counterbalance. Like you wouldn't use a stone underground tomb for storage because it wouldn't store anything for very long, like food-based products. And you wouldn't use it for refuge because there was only one exit and entrance. So if you're found in there, you're dead immediately.
We sort of ended up talking about sound more than the sight.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But there's an element where, like, regardless of whether anyone actually makes any sound, the sound environment in a cave is just going to be completely different. Like, you're hearing all the sound. If you do hear any sounds from outside, they're going to be like filtered and resonated along very specific sound frequencies.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, what's the significance of finding glowing moss in one of these to you?
So at first it was just really cool and looked really nice, and it was sort of every time I took someone new there, I was like, you have to check out this bioluminescent moss, it's so cool. But I think the more I visited it and the more it was kind of there every time, it became a staple part of the performance, and I encouraged the performers, the instrumentalists, to sort of engage with their surroundings. And when you're surrounded by bioluminescent moss, it's sort of it became a key part of the improvised performance.
Yeah, I found it interesting when I did my cursory research into it that it's sometimes called Goblin's Gold,
Yeah.
uh, or like, and that there's a sort of implication of magic to it,
Yeah.
but also maybe an implication of like it being trickery in that like it looks like this amazing glittering gem-like thing, and then it's just some moss.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's good. It kind of fits in with the whole, again, talk about this later, but the folklore of Cornwall and Cornish heritage and history and culture. And again, like some of the people that came to the final performance were claustrophobic, so couldn't come into the actual chamber because it was just fully closed off apart from one little entrance that you have to duck into. But at the end, when people went out and told them, they were like, oh, there's glowing moss in there. One person built up the courage to just run into the chamber to see it. Like, you would kind of like go against your phobia to check out some glowing moss. Like, it's just moss, it's natural, but it's just, I guess, quite powerful.
Yeah, it's kind of reminds me a bit of some folklore stuff which I'd researched more kind of in the northeast when I lived there, and often like places like Boggle Hole, which is just like a big hole, nice. Like cave, which has a like kind of folkloric significance to people, because I mean Boggle is like another word for goblin.
Nice. And
so people would bring like children there to get cured of like whooping cough and stuff.
Yeah.
To like these cave mouths of caves and stuff.
Cool.
So I feel like there's definitely like a broader like British kind of element to it as well, like folkloric element, which I think's been generally just lost more in the more like urbanized, built up corners of the UK.
I imagine a lot of it was like tales that parents would tell children. Like, if you're not a professional writer or whatever, you wouldn't have written it down, would you? And like, I want to do more research to see if there's any sort of tales about this bioluminescent moss. I only looked at the kind of, not even the science behind it, but your classic Google search. But yeah, it'd be cool to see if it's sort of, after us talking about it like this, means more to anyone else or in any cultures.
Well, another thing, again, I'd found using our friend Wikipedia was that, I mean, this moss is kind of found all the way, like all through the Northern Hemisphere, like in the Americas and in Japan and stuff. And that in Japan they have like a cave full of it, but it's treated like a monument. And it's kind of treated with more like reverence, and people can come visit it specifically to see the moss. And I guess I found that interesting because I've just been to Japan, and the mossiness of a lot of like the fact that like there's like statues that are built there where they let the moss grow on it and kind of destroy the structure of it a bit, but intentionally. Yes, maybe sometimes a bit more respect for moss and the strange kind of magic of glow in the dark plants.
Yeah, and the fact it's fully natural. Like, I don't know where like the idea of glow in the dark came from. In like you get like those glow in the dark stars. But maybe it could literally have been from this bioluminescent moss. Not that it's glow in the dark, but the kind of glowing aspect. So there's definitely loads of other things, but nature is magic.
Yeah, it's magic, but it's also like plants are just trying to get a bit more sunlight while hanging about in a dark cave.
Stop touching me.
But they made their own sunlight, which is also kind of beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, so sound. Although we've already talked loads about sound, here's a different sound piece.
Yes.
You chose the soundtrack to Ennismen by Mark Jenkin.
Yes. Pronounced Ennis, Maine, because it's
Why?
Cornish.
Oh.
It was
Is it
Cornish.
men as in people, or is it a place?
No, so it's Cornish for
No.
Stone Island.
That
So
makes more
men being
sense.
island, I think. Yeah.
They should have said Ennis Men and in brackets pronounced Maine,
Maine,
because
I
it's
know.
an island.
Yeah, I know. Doesn't even say it in the film, so you don't even know.
So if you're listening, you might start to pick up on a trend in Jess's choices here. So we have a folk horror film set in Cornwall by a Cornish director and composer. And Jess, where are you from?
No, Cornwall. Yeah, I did this completely by accident. It's all I think about. But
Yeah, so
yeah.
why the soundtrack?
Well, it only came out this year, 2023, I think. So it's one of the more recent new films that I've seen. And I saw it in the cinema, in Truro Cinema. And there was a question and answer with Mark Jenkin, the director, afterwards as well. So it's sort of, when you see a film and it's got a bit more engagement, a lot more sticks with you than other films. So, but obviously that's the film as a whole. But the soundtrack in particular, I'm a sound designer and sound artist, like Tam said. So I'm not only drawn to like the sound effects and the Foley created for film, but also the atmosphere and like the soundscape of a film. And I think with the Ennis Main soundtrack and sound effects, like everything in the film, so Mark Jenkin does it all himself in post-production. I think that he creates this like immense tension and ambience just through the use of synthesis and sort of abstract field recordings, and a really great use of silence and perceived silence, like radio static and hiss. And the way he does it, I think, really complements the visual of the film, which is all filmed on 16mm colour film. But it's sort of, as a standalone, it's so beautiful to listen to as well. So not only does it complement the picture, but it works well as a standalone. And it's a bit experimental and weird, which I love.
Yeah, well, that was what I was going to ask, is how does it stand by itself, and do you listen to it by itself ever, or do you just kind of remember?
It is, yeah. No, you're like, the last point is the last bit of your question is quite good, because it is, I haven't listened to it religiously over and over again as an album on Bandcamp kind of thing. Like, I don't have it on vinyl, but listening to it, like when I was sending it to you, sort of triggered me to re-listen to it and like watch the film again. But re-listening to the soundtrack, it just, obviously it does automatically put me to those parts in the film, particularly when there's phone calls and radio sounds and like conversations in the soundtrack. They actually happen in the film as well. But I think because the film is as dreamy and as atmospheric as the soundtrack, I don't think it's a bad thing that I kind of put them together. But I don't put one above the other either. Like, they complement each other perfectly. However, I think the soundtrack works without the picture so nicely, and you can listen to it just as an album. But I don't think the picture would work as well without the soundtrack, like as a silent film. I think it's quite rare now to find a film whose soundtrack and audio in general works separate to a film that also has a narrative. So when it's like a full art film, you could probably listen to it separately, but this film does actually have narrative, and it's about a woman living in isolation, an ecologist living in isolation on an island, and you do feel a narrative, and there is a bit of speech here and there, but the soundtrack doesn't necessarily need that narrative as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the time, especially with big films, they don't really have a single soundtrack unless they have that kind of a bit cliche, like orchestral approach, and that because that's often so much based around like leitmotifs and stuff like that. Like if you're listening to Hans Zimmer or
Danny Elfman, or
I don't know, or like the Lord of the Rings one is such a classic. Like you've basically, like, most of the soundtrack is kind of a reference to a few different themes, and so like if you wanted to listen to it as an album, you probably just want to listen to the main themes, which would be like probably less than an hour into it, or like maybe a bit more. But then the actual like recorded soundtracks is like 11 hours or something ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas, or like if you think of a lot of the kind of more comedic things, they're usually built up of like pop tunes that we all recognise and stuff like that. Or even a lot of dramas play about with that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not super common for like a soundtrack to be fully one composer.
No.
And for that composer, and it's definitely not common for that composer to have also done the sound design and also done the direction and filming and all that.
I think that's like where, being a Cornish production, because there isn't like a lot of funding and money in films, I don't know if Mark Jenkins started doing it all himself to save on the money. I assume so.
But it's also it's not low production value.
No,
either. I haven't watched the film in its entirety. I mean, especially 16mm analog film.
Exactly. I think
nowadays.
a lot of most of it, I think they did one shot, obviously, because it's 16mm film. But I know that he went back, like after they filmed the bulk of it, to get audio recordings, because a lot of it wasn't like filmed. Like all of the sound is post-production, so he could have filmed some stuff that was going on live, but it's not necessarily in sync with the picture, you know what I mean? As in, if there was a seagull going overhead, he might have caught that on sound but put it somewhere else in the film later on. None of it is like for like, apart from the speech, but all of that is recorded in post as well.
That's creates this really strange visual, like, relationship between the sound and the visuals.
Yeah.
Right. So like you've got this disjoint, which I'm sure like creates this dissonance, which adds to the horror.
Yeah. It's kind of, it fits the theme. And like before it was released, everyone was calling it a folk horror. And in his question and answer,
that's another thing as I was going to bring up, actually, because everything I read was like Mark Jenkins folk horror, and I was like, this
is it?
Like the soundtrack. Listen to the soundtrack. This is not the soundtrack of a folk horror.
No, so he never coined it a folk horror himself, and he still doesn't really know. But it's I think it's a Cornish thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, is that annoying?
It's kind of it's annoying because Cornwall and like Cornish culture and creativity is so much more than just folk, but it does have immensely deep roots in folk and folklore and being Celtic, and it's like history of folklore. So it doesn't surprise me that it's like a lot of indie Spanish films are folk horror films. It's just how one person has kind of coined it, like Guillermo del Toro doing so many folk horror films.
But I don't think he is called folk horror as much.
No, not as much. Not as like indie kind of folk horror as this.
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with folk. It seems more similar to like 70s thrillers. And stuff, you know. Yeah. Because it's like there's no Morris dancing or
no. There's like I think a lot of it is, I guess this is the kind of thing where it is really big outside of Cornwall, and it's been at like international film festivals, and he's just won best sound for a film at something. Should have looked at that first. But I think a lot of it is, if you're Cornish, you'll see the little sort of inclinations towards like the mining history, and then that, like, if you're in Cornwall, the mining history has connections to like the Morris dancing and everything. But just watching it as it is, it's not as obvious.
Yeah.
And again, Mark Jenkins has like a big point of his films where he doesn't want them to be so literal, and he wants people to interpret them as they feel. Like, he involves lichen in this film a lot, and at the question and answer, someone asked him the significance of the lichen. He was just completely honest. He was like, saw it on the floor and I really liked it, but then he had to do a load of research into it, and you're not allowed to pick lichen, so he had to make loads of his own lichen for the film and everything. And he was like, yeah, it got a bit much, but people read into it as this symbol, and he's just like, I liked it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of touches on a completely different thing of like, when you like something as an artist and you're drawn to it, but you can't like put words in it, you can't define it and put it into a box. It doesn't mean it's like nothing. Like, just because you're aesthetically drawn to it doesn't mean that there's like an emptiness to it.
Yeah.
Like, if there is a meaning that someone can find in it, that might be like still relevant to the fact that Mark Jenkins was just like, I like that.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
We're going to have that in my film.
Yeah. I like it as well. It's a nice way of thought.
Yeah. I was just going to say about like the sound is that it's very technological, even if it's retro technology. It reminded me a lot of found footage horror rather than like folky stuff. Like, it's a electronic soundtrack, like long drones and like slow moving repetitive pieces. And the audio is like processed through kind of telephone sounding speakers or like radios or stuff like that. So yeah, it's kind of this thing where the best horror, I feel, doesn't really fit into these categories. But also like the sound of it kind of picked up on what I like about horror and why I'm drawn to it, even though don't really have much of a gut for it.
Yeah, same. You'll be able to do this one, it's fine.
Yeah, it's that it's a space where people are able to really experiment, and your regular film goer accepts that usually. Yeah. I mean, obviously you get people being like pissed off at like indie experimental ones which don't have much of a plot or don't have a monster in them. But often like A24 is so big, and there's sort of like a meme, like it's sort of become a meme that it's like everything is a metaphor in it. Everything is like deeper than what you think, but people enjoy the films. Yeah. And accept the fact that the soundtrack is really strange and
a part of it. Yeah. I think that's a thing as well, where obviously being in that world, both you and I, like the kind of experimental music world, I'll like take friends to a show and they just don't enjoy it because there's no, like, it's just weird. And it's not what they're used to. But when you put it with a picture in a film, I don't know, it makes it bearable for a lot of people. So I think
but also like gives people a reason to sit with something that's not bearable as well.
Yeah.
Like, I'm watching a film and the sound is awful.
Yeah,
and it makes me
exactly.
feel awful and like uncomfortable, but I am able to contextualize that within like a narrative.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think that's as well, like, I can sit and listen to this soundtrack because I love it. But I imagine people could watch it in the film but not sit and listen to it. Maybe they wouldn't even notice it in the film. Like, for me, I'm not like a big visual, I don't have a lot of knowledge of the visual of a film. So I don't sit and think, oh, that's a cut, oh, this and that, or this and that. But I'll sit and listen to the sound, whereas other people do it the other way. They might not notice that this sound is happening in the background, because that's how it's done so perfectly. It's created an atmosphere rather than stood out as a sound.
Yeah, the issue is I'm doing both. I'm like, oh yeah,
you're the worst.
There's that car. Oh yeah, it's just like it ruined some films for me, because I'm of course, there's that sound effect.
Yeah.
And of course, like if there's a fight scene and they're cutting on every single hit, I'm like,
yeah. Always whenever you hear the Wilhelm scream, and I'm like, oh, there we go.
Yeah, or like when I don't know, like soundtrack, like in a not so interesting horror, like when the all the sound disappears for a moment, I'm like, oh,
here we go.
I know what's happening now.
Yeah, jump scare coming. Yeah.
Speaking of jump scare, what is your text, Jess?
My text is dun dun dun, also from Cornwall. Not probably. Yeah, maybe the most Cornish of the three as well.
It's the most explicitly Cornwall.
Yeah, it's the most celebratory of Cornwall.
It's PZ77. PZ standing for Penzance.
Yeah.
Am I right?
You are right.
Yeah.
It is like just the colloquial way of saying Penzance is PZ, because Penzance is a long word, and it comes out really Cornish when you say it.
Penzance is the same length as PZ.
Yeah, but you know what I mean, written down. You couldn't say Penzance 77 written down. Or Penzance 1977. So also the 77 it's about Penzance in 1977.
Right. Specifically in 1977 because that's early punk.
Yes, and it was the year that the Ramones played in Penzance. And I don't know, Sex Pistols played as well. I don't know exactly if that was 77 or not. But yeah, it's basically written, or not written, it's put together by a guy called Simon Parker, who was about during 77 in that scene in Penzance. And during lockdown, he got in contact with, like, I think over 100 people that he knew at that time, just because he had a realisation that was the greatest time of his life. And Penzance was just, it sounds like a wonderful place to have been then. But yeah, he got in contact with all these people. Unfortunately, a lot of them had died, because Penzance also has really horrible issues with drug and alcohol abuse, and motorcycle incidents. And just the scene back then, I think, led to quite a lot of trauma. But the people that got back in contact with him, it was one thing in the whole book was that almost everyone said the same thing over and over and over again, which you'd think would get repetitive and boring, but it just, it was really nice.
And what was that thing?
Well, there were quite a few, but basically naming, like, all the same people got name checked. The Chai and Stylus, a record shop, got name checked every time. Millhouse, a cafe, got name checked all the time. Different venues one called the Millhouse. Wait, what did I just say?
You said the Millhouse.
I can't remember what it was called now. The main venue. No, I can't remember. But it got name checked all the time, and another venue got name checked all the time. And it's just, it was clear that even though like close to 100 people had written all of this, those places stood out so much. That they meant so much to so many people that they still speak about it now. I think the postman's about to come to my door, by the way.
So,
hey,
I just looked up the Ramones and Talking Heads.
Yes, Talking Heads was supporting.
In, small little band who went nowhere, Talking Heads. In Winter Gardens.
That's where what it is. Wait, let me...
That's right, at the Crossovers podcast, we come prepared.
Hell yeah. My brain's not good. Winter Gardens, but it was actually called... Oh my god, I've read it so many times in this book. I can't believe I've forgotten it. The Millhouse was the cafe. It'll come to me by the end of it.
Alright.
Yeah,
So
well.
in about the 60th minute of the podcast, we'll all just hear a shout.
I got it.
So what happened to Penzance?
What happened to it? It basically lost a lot. Still got the Jubilee pool. I'm going to ignore this post person. There's a thing called the Jubilee pool, but there's so many, in this book, so many people talk about different places that I used to go and hang out, on the pier and at different places. And the pier still exists, the Jubilee pool still exists, but all of the actual establishments, like the record shop, the cafe, the venue, they're all long gone, whether it was down to lack of funding or just no interest anymore. But it sort of made Penzance a bit of a dead town, which is sad. Until recently. And it's one thing that I love about Cornwall is that, as you were saying earlier, here in London, so many venues are closing down, down to lack of funding or neighbours' complaints or just bad cancels. But in Cornwall, they seem to be opening more, which is bizarre because there's even less funding in Cornwall and even more poverty. But one thing that I think is really clear in the book is this sort of community in Cornwall. So it might not be in Penzance anymore, but in Falmouth, which is where I did my undergraduate degree, it's got in the last couple of years 2 new venues opened. This is since COVID. One of which is called the Cornish Bank, which is putting Cornwall, or at least Falmouth, on the map. A couple of months ago I saw the Far Side there to an audience of 250 people, and it was one of the greatest things I've ever experienced, because it was the whole of Cornwall pulled together to give this international group the best gig they've ever done, kind of thing. And they said that, they might have said it to everyone they went and played to, but I watched some other live videos and I was nah, they had no idea where they were as well. They were Falmouth? Where on earth are we? And then they had videos of them walking through the town. But it's also the kind of place where I think there is, despite touring bands coming down and whatnot, there's no hierarchy in the music and creative scenes. Everyone knows the struggle, the money struggle, the lack of interest struggle, lack of diversity struggle, and everyone's kind of in it together and just working together to make it better. And I can go to a venue and watch someone that's got 50,000 followers, and I can go and see to a little pub the next day and watch someone else that's got 200 followers, and the musician from the night before will be at the pub watching this person play. It's just everyone's kind of in it together, which I don't feel in London. Outside of London, 100%, but
London, well, the thing is, there's so much happening that people kind of fall into their lanes.
Yes, exactly.
So there's something happening very near, which just someone might not have any time to go and see. The pub around the corner's got this artist with 200 followers, but the artist who has 50,000 followers, whatever, is probably got so many other things that they're going to.
Yeah. I think a lot of the time as well.
Or they're struggling with their regular job because they've got 50,000 followers, but they've also got London rent. So it's a weird. I don't know. It's a weird. I think that obviously I say it having lived in Cornwall and London, that there is this kind of parallel. Both are in the middle of a housing crisis. Both are the cost of living is raising so quickly compared to wages. And in Cornwall, it's London's here and Cornwall's here, but they're raising at the same time. Yeah, cool.
And a lot of
great one for audio medium, Jess.
Oh yeah. I put my left hand at my nose and my right hand at my forehead. My forehead was London, my nose was Cornwall. mid-forehead, and they raised together. I just did it again. But one of the things, going back to the book, is that a lot of people write about the struggle they had in the 70s, and that was nationwide, absolutely. Hence the birth of punk.
There's a lot of like roughing it.
Yeah.
From the sections I read, and like the kind of roughing it which doesn't seem to be so possible nowadays.
No,
like,
it's
we
too
don't
illegal.
Really have we don't really have squats anymore. No. Like we have, like I know a few people who are like, oh yeah, I live in this squat and I pay £500 a month for it, and I'm like, that's not a squat.
It's what I paid in London for a flat 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that's a like squats have been replaced with guardianships, which are still expensive rent, except you don't have your tenants' rights.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, what happened to the actual like really cheap places or places that you could kind of hide out and sleep? That's just like that's something which seemed to have ended in like the 90s. Yeah,
definitely. It's kind of, it ended when punk died as well. I mean, me and you have spoken at great length about this before.
I'm really knowledgeable about when punk died. No, I don't, what?
No, but it's like
it's very easy to go like everyone's always talking about punk being dead at a certain time. Like, punk's not dead. What does it mean? Qualify that statement about punk dying.
It's not died. It never died. The mindset, the punk mindset is still alive, but the punk music and the riots kind of died when it became harder to do it, because we're becoming more compliant as a country. I've never been exposed to a riot yet. My parents definitely have.
Yeah.
But that's a whole different topic.
But then I don't know whether the presence of riots is necessarily like linked to the specific music of it.
No. I think the music came out of it rather than vice versa.
Yeah. I do have more questions. You highlighted a couple stories to me when you sent me some extracts, and both of them involved Londoners moving to Cornwall.
Yes.
And finding something there. Why the Londoners? Why the outsiders?
Well,
is it because they? I was just gonna say, like, is it because they kind of have that contrast where they're like, London was like this and Cornwall was like this.
Yeah.
Does that relate to you at all as a Cornish person moving to London?
Only a little bit. But it's the whole book. Obviously, I sent you like a few passages, and I made sure I sent those two. There were other London ones as well, but those two in particular, because they were sort of examples of people that lived in London as Londoners, rather than living in like the home counties or the suburbs or whatever. But the whole book is like a proper mix of Cornish people who've stayed in Cornwall, never left, Cornish people who moved away and never came back, Cornish people who moved away and eventually returned, and then outsiders like the Londoners who moved to Cornwall and then never left. And I often talk to people in London who see Cornwall as sort of like a dead-end tourist beach haven with no job prospects and nothing to do, just second homeowners and whatnot. And second homeowners and tourism is absolutely correct, like it's rife. But it's just sort of not, I can't stress enough how sort of rich and full of culture Cornwall is. And these examples of the Londoners in PZ77 who moved to Cornwall in the 70s and still have a rich and full life of music and culture in Cornwall now is like the example that I need to prove that, like, even being a Londoner, like, I'm moving back to Cornwall next year and I'm taking Sonny, my partner, who is a born and bred Londoner, and he's definitely totally worried that, like, there's going to be absolutely nothing to do. And again, it's just got to try it first. Some people do move to Cornwall and don't find anything to do. But in the creative scene, I think there's a lot going on.
I mean, by definition, there is less human activity in places where there's less population. But there is I do find there's like a big flaw with a lot of Londoners in that they don't really think anything else is happening in the whole of the country.
Yeah.
Or in like the rest of Europe even.
Or even the rest of London. Like, I'm a sucker for it as well, not thinking there's stuff going on in West London, because I just lump it in with this.
I mean, I don't know how much there is happening in West London.
A bad example. North
bad
London.
Example.
I've been to some wicked venues there.
North London, East London, South London. Yeah. West London, I mean, even so, there will be stuff happening in West London, but there will also, weirdly enough, be fewer people coming to stuff, the good stuff that is happening there. Like, exactly. I went to a free improv gig in Ealing in West London on Saturday, and had some like proper big names.
Yeah.
And like kind of very seasoned old like free improvisers.
Nice.
But basically like no one in the venue.
No.
I think because like the people who lived in the area just weren't really into it, and the people who were into it was like, there's nothing happening in Ealing, or I'm not going that far.
Yeah.
The attitude does change in London, like based on distance.
100%. I think unless you're there as well, like I'm sure if I lived in West London, I'd get to know what was going on around. It's the same with Cornwall. People think there's nothing going on there because they haven't experienced it. And like people think that South East London is like a dead end kind of just quiet little place, but there's tons going on here. But again, I only know that because I am here.
Also, Southeast Londoners know that there's a lot of stuff happening, and so they don't move out. It's
and that
this whole thing. I don't know. It's as someone who lived in Newcastle for a bit. I'm like really surprised when I talk to someone who's basically not left London their whole life. Yeah. When they're like disparaging about like the north of England or whatever. Because like I know a lot of my best friends aren't from London now, so it's like there's all these kind of places which get like written off, because they're in like the corners of the country or like the edges, like far away from London, but they've got so much.
Yeah, I also think it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, there's a lot of people I wouldn't want to go to Cornwall and discover what's going on in Cornwall, because then it would just ruin the sort of culture.
You talking about landlords?
They already exist down there. No, there is a huge housing crisis in Cornwall, though, like extreme levels of poverty. I think it's absolutely dire. And a lot of it is down to specifically Londoners with second homes in Cornwall, because they're the Londoners that think there's nothing going on down there, and it's just nice to go down and have a cottage on the beach for your 3 months out of the year, leave it empty for the rest. But that's everyone knows about that. It's a huge crisis.
Well, I don't know if everyone does know about it, and I think
again,
also the issue is that some people know about it and they just don't care.
Yeah, 100%.
Because they don't because of what you said. Like, it's not really, Cornwall's not seen as a place with its own incredibly old culture. Yeah. Separate. Yeah. Like a separate and different culture to
the tourism.
Other parts of the UK. I mean, obviously there's like shared culture in many ways, but it's also different flavours.
Yeah, 100%. And it's got shared culture with other, obviously, Celtic nations and whatnot. Yeah. And it's got like, it does have stuff like people never used to go past maybe Exeter. No, maybe Bristol. If they went on tour, they'd play in Bristol and they'd never go further south. Mm-hmm. But now Falmouth has put it on the map it is getting that slightly more London. I say London vibe only because that's the closest sort of parallel. And there are like, I'm from Truro, born and raised Truro, and like on Cornish meme pages they'll say it's like the London of Cornwall, which is so like, if as a Londoner going there you'll be like, what? But to people in Cornwall, it is that. Truro.
Oh, Truro. I've been to Cornwall a lot as a kid, which puts me in the Londoners going to Cornwall on holiday.
A lot of people went a lot as a kid and then haven't visited it again as an adult. I've done that with like a lot of places, and I think it's a realisation that you're exposed to completely different stuff as a kid with your parents taking you on a holiday to the actual, like I say to some people about being from Cornwall, they're like, oh yeah, I used to go and stay in this place like every year, and I'm like, you did? Oh, I love Cornwall. It's like, yeah, the fish and chips down there, like this and that. And like, I can't be mean because you are praising the parts of Cornwall that you saw, but you didn't see Cornwall, kind of thing.
Yeah, but I do find like, well, there's always a good way to freak Cornish people out, but just mentioning Red Ruth.
Yeah, Red Ruth, Dead Ruth. No one knows it.
Because that's not where people have gone visit, and so like that freaks people out. They're like, "Why do you know?"
Yeah, a good example. What's it called? You know, the YouTube channel Turd Towns.
No.
They're always basically this guy that goes to different counties or whatever and visits like the worst towns and tells you why they're bad, and he just did one on Cornwall, and I guarantee that no one will have heard of the places in the top like 5 turd towns or wherever it is, apart from Penzance, because it's the end of the train line from London Paddington. That's on the top turd towns, and Redruth I think was. But St Austell, top turd town, guarantee you never heard of it. Because there are shit things about Cornwall as well. To
be honest, I might have heard of that.
Yeah.
But I haven't been.
No.
Yeah, I don't know, like, it's kind of... Penzance, I mean, even when I was there as a kid, I did feel the bohemian vibes that you kind of, like... Obviously, Brighton's very different and has a sort of different kind of... level of wealth in it as well, probably, but like a kind of similar flavour and aesthetic of that. People who were young in the 70s and the things that they're into from there, like punk and hippie stuff, and
100%.
Just general counterculture from that period. I remember picking up on that a bit in Penzance, even when I was like 12.
Yeah, it is. You probably saw someone shooting off in a public toilet, and it will
I wasn't hanging around in the public toilets.
Well, you didn't look at the Penzance Winter Gardens public toilet.
I didn't look at the public toilet. I wasn't on a like watching people take heroin tourism tour. But yeah, I'm just gonna see if... Where did you pick up the book? That was my last question.
So my mum gave it to me, I think for my birthday or Christmas, I can't remember, last year. But she got it direct from Simon Parker, the author and editor, at a talk that he gave in Red Ruth.
Red Ruth coming up.
It actually is. Apparently. It's got this new creative scene that's thriving, a place called The Ladder. I still haven't visited, but they're doing fucking tons of stuff. It's and that's where I'm ignorant as well. I've been down like 7 times knowing Red Ruth is on the up, and I still haven't been. Well,
it's hard to stay on top of, even if like you're talking about one city.
Yeah.
You know, like I like to think I know Newcastle well, but I know that there's just like half of it is just a big black spot.
Yeah.
In my mind. But yeah, I think we've probably run way longer than we should have.
Chatting.
So I'm gonna cut it off there.
Nice.
Thank you, Jess, for being the first guest on the Crossovers podcast.
Thank you, Tam, for hosting the first episode of the Crossovers podcast.
You're welcome. And to you, listener, catch you next time.
Listener. Singular.
Listener. Yeah, we're talking to one listener. Like,
Yeah.
people don't listen to podcasts in groups.
That's true. That's funny.